Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with 16 organ works I kinda couldn't live without. Kind of. Yeah, kind of. I have a troubled relationship to organ music. Actually, well, I say that a lot, but then, here comes a whole huge clump of it. So, my troubles are mostly of my own imagining, I suppose. Now, the organ is just one of these fascinating devices. I'm much more interested in the construction and history of its various stops and, the thing than I am in the music that was written for it. Because the music that was written for it all sounds kind of, well, organy. What can I tell you? You know what it sounds like. And it's just a strange sounding instrument, but it was in its day, and still is in some respects, the most complex and magnificent non-electric mechanical device ever invented. Because when you think about it, hundreds and hundreds of stops and millions of different sound combinations and thousands of pipes and all of it fed by wind chest, pumped by horrifying, awful, humanly trafficked child laborers for the glory of God and the worshipers in the church. I mean, above where the pit where these poor kids were working. It's just this eerie fascination about the thing. On the one hand, it's a glorious tribute to human ingenuity. On the other hand, it's a horrifying comment on the things that people do in the name of religion, and the repertoire written for it is kind of extraordinary and unique in and of itself. As the instruments got bigger and more complicated, and then electricity came in, and all hell broke loose, and oh my goodness. So yeah, and I you can tell I'm a little hesitant to sort of figure out exactly what to say about this stuff. I don't listen to organ music often. You have to be in the mood, or I have to be in the mood. When I am in the mood, I enjoy it tremendously. There are just incredible, powerful, wonderful works written for the instrument, as we all know. And somehow, I can't even begin to describe how, I have managed to put together 16 organ works by 16 different composers that I really care about. I mean, I do. I enjoy them. I listen to them. And you may enjoy them too, as long as nobody notices. The trouble with the organ is it's huge, it's big, it's loud, but you only want to listen to it when, like, the neighbors don't notice, right? You don't want anybody to think that you are actually one of those people who plays organ music. I mean, I'll give you an example. When I was living on 52nd Street in Manhattan, I was living in a little studio in the ground floor of a large building. It was a big rental building, in a very good area. And although, I mean, I have to say, in typical social engineering of the 1970s, they took this fabulous area and they stuck a homeless women's shelter in the mansion that was this enormous mansion next to my building. Well, they got rid of it. Now it's luxury condominiums, which is really more like it. But that caused the entire neighborhood crime wave, as these, homeless women were visiting their boyfriends and doing drugs on the front. And it's a whole thing. But anyway, here I was on 52nd Street and First Avenue in Manhattan, and in a studio apartment. And you can only imagine, given this, what that looked like. I mean, I didn't even have an overflow room then. It was all in my studio apartment. I had to sleep standing up. Anyway, I had a neighbor. She was absolutely loathsome. She lived in the studio apartment next to mine, and she worked for the landlord, at least briefly. I don't think anyone could stand her, but she worked for the landlord, and she was always complaining about the music because the walls were thin. I got that. The walls really were thin. And I didn't, there were moments when, I had my tam-tam, when I would practice the ending of pictures at an exhibition. Most people in the building enjoyed the concert, as did everyone else on the east side of Manhattan. As far as I could tell, she did not like it. And even when I was playing, I remember I was once playing a string quartet at very modest volume, where she was banging on my door and complaining and calling management and calling the cops and calling everyone she could. She was just awful. Well, one day I was doing in one of my organ music phases, and I was playing organ music, and I wasn't playing it too loudly. I was very, very careful. I really was, to be considerate. And I turned everything off at 9 or 10 o'clock at night. I didn't, So I was playing some organ music, and I found out a couple of days later that she had taken up a petition and was going from door to door throughout the building, claiming that I was spending all of my time listening to satanic music. I mean, I was playing the Widor toccata and, Bach, and, but I was playing satanic music, which I topped it off by playing Carmina Burana one day, of course, which was, the satanic chanting. And she had no idea what any of this stuff was. So no one was really interested in signing the petition. It's not like it mattered, but she wanted to have me evicted for playing satanic music. And that was my experience with organ music. I mean, actually, I did get her back. What happened was one day she decided to have sex. It was the first time she'd ever done it in her life. I'm sure it was. And she was quite noisy about it. And everyone in the lobby could hear what was going on in her apartment, because our apartments, sort of exited on the lobby. And so I took a little bit of a little note and I stuffed it under her door. And while she was, enjoying herself with her boyfriend, saying, if you can't be quiet, I'm going to take up a petition to have you evicted for committing acts of unspeakable indecency in public, where everybody could hear them. Well, she moved out the next week. Ha ha! So there you go. Anyway, that's my experience with organ music. Here are the 16 organ works I kind of couldn't live without. First, Frescobaldi, Fiori, Musicali, Flowers of Music. This is a mixture of sacred and secular music from the 1630s, very, very early, the beginning of the Baroque period, the beginning of all of that stuff. And of course, as we tend to forget, or the Germans would really want us to forget, all of this began in Italy. And Frescobaldi was a wonderful composer, and his music is lovely. There are three, I think, in the collection, 3 organ masses. An organ mass is simply a selection of organ pieces that follow the pattern of the mass ordinary. So they're written to be played in in the appropriate time in the celebration of the mass, or in replacement sometimes of certain prayers or whatnot. But anyway, there's that, which is lovely, and then some virtuoso toccata-like pieces he threw in there as well. He also did some very fine secular music collections. He's a very, very interesting early Baroque composer, worth getting to know, because instrumental music in those days was kind of a new thing. And so that's really kind of cool. Sweelinck, I love Sweelinck, however you want to pronounce him. Sweelinck is fabulous. He wrote those unbelievably complete Geneva Psalter, all the Psalms, all 150 of those suckers. He set as French language madrigals, and they are so beautiful. But he was basically a keyboard composer as well, an organ music composer, and his Fantasia Chromatica. Oh, is that nifty and modern and weird sounding, and just a fabulous piece of extraordinary music that you'll play for your friends, and they will have no clue who wrote it or when they wrote it or what it is. It's just one of those timeless masterpieces that foretells Wagner's Tristan and Isolde. I mean, everything chromatic does that. But yeah, I mean, Sweelinck is fabulous. You should have a disc of his keyboard stuff for organ or something else. Buxtehude. Well, Buxtehude is the guy, remember, that Bach walked 3,000 miles to go and hear, and outstayed his leave of absence by about 6 years or something. I mean, time moved differently in the Baroque era. It really did, especially when you had to walk to get anywhere. So he was in Lübeck, where he was running the music in Lübeck. And Lübeck was a great, celebrated center of German Baroquistry. It really was. And Bach went there, and then, of course, eventually he left. And the reason he left, we all know, is because the deal in Lübeck, as a famous story, was that in order to get Buxtehude his job and take over in Lübeck, you had to marry his daughter. whose name was, it was, I wish her name was, but it wasn't. It was Euphrodisia Buxtehude. No, it wasn't. Her name was Anna, actually. And poor old Anna was getting on in years and apparently was a little bit long in the tooth. And every famous German composer stopped in Lubeck to audition for Buxtehude's job. Then they saw what the deal was, and they all ran away. And that, I think, is sort of sad. I've always wanted to write a play, or we should do something, all of us. We should collaborate on some sort of entertainment or a movie called Buxtehude's Daughter that retells the whole story from her perspective. Because I'm sure she was a perfectly lovely girl, but whatever happened, in those days, lovely was, a matter of opinion anyway, because everybody had, smallpox, and a goiter and a hair lip and a hump, and, beauty was in the eye of the beholder. So anyway, Buxtehude had nothing but daughters, actually, and he was desperately concerned to marry them off. Eventually, he found a guy named Schieferdecker, and Schieferdecker married Anna Buxtehude, whose name became Anna Buxtehude Schieferdecker. And Lubeck ceased to be a place of musical importance because they didn't get Bach, they didn't get Handel, they didn't get Telemann, they didn't get Matheson. There was a whole bunch of wannabe prospective people. Anyway, Buxtehude was the pre-Bach of German music. He was a very, very fine composer. And his Chaconne in C minor, B.W. Bach's Verzeichnis, whatever, B159. Oh, it's wonderful. It's a big, juicy organ masterpiece that foretells the next work on my list, Bach's Passacaglia and Fugue in C minor, for organ, which is also just a grand, monumental hunk of Bachitude. It's just amazing. Actually, all of Bach's organ music is great. And of all of the, I say I have a Bach problem, and I do, because there are a lot of things of his that I don't particularly care for. But his organ music, if all the rest of the organ music in the universe disappeared, except for Bach's, I would be very happy. In fact, I think, as I've said before, they should take everything that was written in Germany in the 18th century for the organ and attribute it to Bach, because then you'd have it all in one place. And you might as well attribute it to Bach because he was the best, and what the hell. So there you go. After Bach, there is this huge emptiness, a void in the universe of organ music. That doesn't mean they weren't writing it. It just means that nobody cared that they were writing it. And we skip to the Mendelssohn organ sonatas, terribly underrated works, fabulous, fabulous music. Written with Mendelssohn's typical ingenuity and craftsmanship and love of Bach in that style, quite often in the more contrapuntal episodes. They're wonderful works, and beautiful and full of variety and color and interest. And I remember the first time I heard them, because, like so many, I had this view of Mendelssohn as this sort of wimpy Victorian, and they're so exciting and full of good music. They really are. It's a big surprise. Then we move on to Liszt, the Fantasia and Fugue on Ad nos ad salutarem undam. That's a hymn, a chorale, which is sung in Meyerbeer's La Prophète. And Liszt wrote this 30-minute long extravaganza. If you like the Liszt B minor sonata, you should like the Ad nos Fantasy, as it's called by us music folks. The Ad nos Fantasy. It's amazing. It's a tough work. It's gnarly and chromatic, and it's on an organ, which makes anything sound gnarlier and more chromatic than it ordinarily would. But it's fabulous. It really is. Liszt arranged it for piano 4 hands or 2 pianos or something. Busoni arranged it for piano 1 hand. It's more commonly heard in one of those piano versions these days, but the organ original is really a knockout. Oh, it's fabulous. It's worth getting to know. Liszt wrote a lot of pretty good organ music, actually. Then there was a Reubke, who I think was a pupil of Liszt at one point. He only lived to be like 7 or something. He died when he was very young. And he wrote a piano sonata, and he wrote an organ sonata. And it's a really good organ sonata. It's like 20 minutes long. It's fun to listen to. And there's a lot to be said for a guy who writes like 2 pieces of music and then drops dead, if they're good. And they were, it's an iconic work in the German organ repertoire. Then there's Rheinberger. Rheinberger wrote a whole passel of organ sonatas, like 20 of them or something like that. I did a review on this channel of the Brilliant Classics Complete Rheinberger Organ Sonata set. They are shockingly attractive. Really, really attractive. He's in the school of Mendelssohn, that Leipzig school, and at its best, it sounded like Mendelssohn. At its worst, it sounded like bad Mendelssohn. But Rheinberger knew what he was doing with his organ writing. It was very, very fine. And the organ sonatas have literally dozens of lovely movements and sections and whole works and things that you can explore at your leisure. They're not long. They're not annoying. They're really, really wonderful pieces. That was a big discovery of mine, and it was a fairly recent one. Then, of course, there's Franck. If it's not by Bach and it's written for the organ, it might as well be by Franck. We could take the whole French organ school and say it's all by Franck. Franck's Grande Pièce Symphonique, which is quite similar in concept to the Liszt Fantasia on Adnos. In a way, it's a single movement, half hour, 25-minute long symphony in a large mechanical steam calliope is what it is. It actually has three big movements. The structure is very similar to that of the Symphony in D minor, although it was written far, far earlier. And it's an incredible masterpiece and lots of fun to listen to and fun to follow, because it does have this sort of thematic unity and transformation of ideas from one section to the next. And it's Franck, and I love Franck. I mean, so what the heck? Widor, Organ Symphony number 5. Now, the Organ Symphony number 5 has the toccata. You know, the famous cha-cha, cha-cha-cha, 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 cha-cha-cha. If that made you want to run away screaming, then don't listen to the Widor Organ Symphony number 5. That's the finale. You kind of wish a tune would happen on top of it, which eventually it does, actually, sort of, kind of. But the whole piece is beautiful. It really is. I mean, it's got a variation movement. It's got a scherzo. It's got some lovely melodies. People only play the toccata. I just think that's stupid. The whole thing deserves to be heard. I mean, I can do the opening. Bum bum ba dum bum bum da dum bum 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 ba da da. See? I mean, I can do more than the toccata. You really should hear the whole Fifth Organ Symphony. There's a whole pile of organ symphonies. He wrote, 10 or 11 of them or something like that. And they're beautiful works. They really are. It's a wonderful, wonderful collection of music that you could also get into if you find yourself, somehow captivated by this. And against all odds, it's tremendous. It really is. Then, what else have we got here? Oh, yes, Guilmant. Guilmant was a guy like Widor. I mean, he's not as well known now, but he was one of those French people from that period who was instrumental in creating the repertoire for the 19th century, what became the modern symphonic style organ, these wonderful French organs that were being built by Merklin and Cavaillé-Coll particularly. And, he wrote some really good music. He didn't call his pieces symphonies, he called them sonatas. The symphonies by Widor were really suites. They weren't symphonic like orchestral symphonies. They were collections of movements, usually 4, 5, 6, 7, a whole bunch of them. But Guilmant was more classically oriented. His sonatas are 3 and 4 movement works, and he orchestrated some of them. And so I chose his Organ Sonata number 2 because it also became his Symphony number 2, which is very, very interesting. You can compare them. And the symphony is for organ and orchestra. It became a concertante work. I mean, it's really, really wonderful to hear these two arrangements of the same music. And his music is solid stuff. I mean, people sort of poo-pooed it after his death, as they did much of the 19th century French organ school, particularly if you were not French. And so, the Germans, of course, had no time for it, and the English, detested it because it was French. But he was a really, really serious composer. He was very popular in the United States, actually. And the Organ Sonata and Organ Symphony are lovely works. They're really fun to listen to. Number 2. Then there's Louis Vierne. Well, Vierne was blind, not that it mattered. And he was, Widor's successor. And his music became progressively more gnarly and chromatic as he got older. And I find like I said, gnarly and chromatic organ music is really gnarly and really chromatic, unless it's in a different style altogether, which we'll get to in a minute. And Vierne wrote just a wonderful short work called Carillon de Westminster. It's Westminster chimes, a piece based on Westminster chimes, going da 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 dum, bum ba da dum, with all kinds of hoogie wigglies and things around it. It's a delightful work. It's really just fun to listen to. His first organ symphony, Vierne, the first couple of them actually, he wrote 5, I believe. They're both wonderful. They really are. And he also wrote some really fine chamber music and other pieces that don't get played very often. He was a very good composer in the Franckian school. So try the Carillon de Westminster. Have a little fun. Organ music can be fun. It has to work at it. It doesn't always sound fun, but it can be. And this is a fun piece. Then Edouard Batiste. He was another one of those crew with Guilmant and Widor and all those people. His music is roundly neglected nowadays. Everybody thought he was kind of trashy, but Batiste was a major, major force in the organ music of the 1850s and 60s and 70s. And there is a disc of stuff that I've talked about. You can look at Batiste, look him up. I've done videos about this because it's marvelous. Batiste was trying to raise the level of French organ liturgical music because, basically what people were playing in church was operatic potpourris. I mean, the ballet of the satanically zombified nuns from Robert le Diable being played as an offertoire during a mass. I mean, people were, the audience loved it. The religious authorities were horrified, and the aestheticians were horrified, and so they, there was a need for better quality French organ music. And what Batiste did is he took all the slow movements from all the Beethoven symphonies and he arranged them as French liturgical music to be performed during Mass, which meant editing and cutting them, making them just 3 or 4 or 5 minutes long. But they're wonderful arrangements. And Diego Innocenzi has recorded them all, and you just got to hear this stuff. And the disc also has some of his other, sort of trashier French organ things. There's an orage, which was a big popular thing in French church music of the day. An orage is a storm. It starts with like a little pastoral thing with merry-go-rounds going and peasants jumping up and down. And then the storm comes and you just lean on the whole organ and you're like this, and it's bang through. To show off what the organ could do. Oh, God, it's fun. So Batiste is someone you should know, and his Grand Offertoires, these grand offertories, and other pieces. There's an Elevation and a Communion and all this thing. They're all based on the slow movements of all the Beethoven symphonies, and you're just not going to believe your ears. That's also fun. Organ music can be fun. You can even have fun when you're going to Mass on Sunday in an unheated church on an uncomfortable pew or bench or whatever the heck you're sitting on. Just marvelous. Duruflé. Now, Duruflé wrote the Requiem 4 or 5 different times. He arranged it for everything, and very little else. There are a few organ works, just tiny little pieces here and there. He was very self-critical. He was like Dukas. He was one of those guys. He could, he wrote 3 pieces, and that was it, And so there is a lovely, lovely work for organ, his Suite Opus 5, which is delightful. I mean, it's a wonderful piece, and his style is so attractive. I mean, it really is. Everything he wrote is just polished to a high gloss. It really is. I mean, in the best sense. Lovely, lovely music. And then Carl Nielsen, Commotio. This is a very late work. Nielsen wrote very little for the keyboard. He wrote a limited number of piano pieces, some real masterpieces, and this is his one big organ piece. There are some other little ones, I think, but it's a major work. It's like 20 some odd minutes long. It's been orchestrated, and it sounds like late Nielsen, like the 5th and 6th symphonies, that sort of thing, only for organ. It's fantastic. Nielsen was a composer who had such a strong personality of his own, and generally speaking, you're safe if you were curious about the organ if you have a composer and you like that composer, then you will like that composer's organ music because it will sound like that composer, less like an organ and more like the composer, which is what you want. And this is one of those. It's one of those tremendous pieces that really, it's a 20th century, early 20th century anyway, masterpiece. It was composed in the 1920s, I think, or the early 30s. Really exceptional work. And last but not least, we have to talk about Messiaen, who was the great representative, or the last representative, really, of the great French organ school of the 19th century. He wrote these enormous collections of organ pieces, these long works based on, various liturgical things. There's also the abstract work, the Livre d'Orgue, which is virtually unlistenable. But his last great organ work was Livre du Saint-Sacrement, the book of the sacred sacrament. And it's in like a bazillion movements, and each one has a liturgical subscript and a superscript or whatever. But the music is remarkable. His sense of color, his unique feel for harmony, his use of Hindu rhythms, all these things. His bird song, there's bird stuff everywhere. All of the things that you like or detest about Messiaen are in his organ works. They are entirely representative. And so that makes a fabulous way to conclude these 16 organ works I kinda couldn't live without. Kinda. I'm dying to see your list. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.